So as you've just heard, we will be recording this and it will be made available afterwards. And welcome to the Women in Innovation Building Success Branding webinar today. Just a few things to note. You have all joined and you are all on mute. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask anything, just please put it in the Q&A box and I'll read them out at the end and Amanda will answer. So today we've got Amanda Duryachinsky. I apologise if I've pronounced that.
Well done.
She is a brand transformation consultant with over 20 years experience and she works with a lot of global brands across many sectors. She also helps smaller companies grow, but I'll let Amanda introduce herself a little bit more and run through the presentation with you today. So over to you now, Amanda. Thanks.
So this is Branding for Founders. I understand that most of you have companies already or thinking about starting up a company. So this is pitched at you. So who am I? I'm a freelance marketing consultant. I'm a chartered marketeer. I've had various positions as CMO or marketing director with various brands. And I've also worked at Ogilvy for 4 years, where I've advised several international brands. And currently I'm helping in particular startups with their brand positioning and their brand strategies. And these are my details. So we'll move on. Hang on. So we're going to cover quite a lot today. Some of it is around the theory of branding, and then I'll share quite a lot of examples with you. And then we'll go on to the important topic of how to put a brand or how to implement a brand and how to monitor a brand. And as I said, at the end, there will be questions, time for questions. So a little bit of interactivity. Here are some logos without names and even without colors. If you could go to your chat and tell me what your brand associations are with the logo on the top right. What are the first words that you think of when you see that logo, that M in the top right-hand corner? Thanks, Rachel. Yummy. Anything else? Cheap burgers, good fries. Global nice. Yep, we know it's McDonald's. Okay. What about the logo just below it, the bird? What do people associate with this logo? Procrastination, very good. Microblogging. Okay, trolling, some negative connotations. Okay, news. A whole lot of influences, comms. Lifestyle businesses. And some warnings. So interesting, there's some positive connotations and associations and also some negatives around some of these global brands. But these brands have spent millions of dollars establishing these associations around their brands. Obviously, they're trying to encourage positive associations, and some of what they've done has caused consumers to perceive some of the negatives, but they have spent millions and millions advertising and communicating and all the other areas around branding to establish the what you think about these brands. So what is a brand? I think this is a really important slide, because a brand is really about consumer perception. It's what your prospects think about when he or she hears your brand name or looks at your brand, and it's the combined what everybody thinks of your brand. For example, is it factual? It comes in a Robin's egg blue box, and could be emotional, so it's romantic. So we all know that's Tiffany's. So this is what branding is trying to achieve when we go about the activity of branding. And the image on the right is quite a good descriptor. So companies build brands like birds build nests, one twig at a time. So everything that you do as a brand, every little thing that you do, put out, every way that you behave, every time you greet a customer, how you answer the phone, how long it takes to answer the phone, every single thing that you do. These are all little perceptions that your consumers are picking up about your brand and making judgments about. And it's all of those little interactions and little things that they've picked up, what other people have said, what they've picked up on social media. It's all of those things that made up the perception of the brand. And your job as a brand owner is to try to, I guess, manipulate, but certainly plan what your brand and all those little strands, what that looks like and how that's delivered. So what is a brand? So just to be really clear, a brand is not just a name or logo. So this is an interesting concept. So there's the idea that the brand that all consumers see is like the tip of an iceberg. So that's your packaging, your social presence, what you're publicly communicating out there. And everything else that sits in a brand is all of the other things. So that's everything around your brand values. It could be around your investor relations, your whole marketing strategy, every one of your marketing channels. It definitely includes your staff, how you train them, how you hire them, what you hire for. It includes, as I said, how you answer the phone, your service standards. Every single piece that you've defined about how your organization works is part of your brand, because consumers can see little parts of this when they interact with your entire brand experience. I hope that makes sense. I'll refer back to this as we go through. Hang on. Sorry. Going back. So there's another important concept around branding, and that we're trying to create a brand versus a commodity. So what distinguishes a brand from an unbranded commodity counterpart is that it gives its equity is the sum total of consumers' perceptions and feelings about the product's attributes, about how it performs, about the brand name, and about the company associated with producing it. And to illustrate that point, water. So water as a commodity on the right, most people don't even pay for. And really it's a commodity is features and price. With water, we don't even pay for it. But in some, say it's butter, we would pay for a generic butter without even a brand. And then on the left, I've pulled in examples of branded bottles of water and the price premium that they've now been able to put in the market because they've created a brand. So a brand has features, price, but also meaning. So the management of the brand has established this additional value, this brand equity, as we call it in marketing. And this is the power of brands. So these are the different prices of these various brands in the market. So we can go from the very cheap, 40p a bottle of water, going all the way up to, £4.30, £20, going to £5. And then the most expensive bottle of water in the world is £50,000. I kid you not. The bottle is made from 24 karat gold, and it's made by a very famous glassware designer who designs spirits. I'm not entirely sure who buys them, but it is on the market and it is for sale. And that's astonishing brand equity building, really, from the generic category of water. So that's what we're trying to build. So brand equity is brand minus the commodity. That's your brand equity. So it's your branded can of cola, Coca-Cola, minus the generic and the price that someone's prepared to pay for that equals the brand equity that they've built. Or your brand versus the generic equivalent in your market, that's your brand equity. And that's what you're trying to build when you're doing brand building. So to create brand equity, we need to invest in creating brand awareness and creating your brand image. So investing in brand awareness. So what do we mean by that? And there's different ways to measure brand awareness. So unaided brand awareness is, for example, if you're asking about breakfast cereals, so you'll be asking, which brand cereals are you aware of? And then they'll start rattling off Kellogg's, Weetabix. So the consumer, this is top of mind. These are the brands that have come. When we ask aided awareness, we'll show them a list of all of the cereal brands in the market. We say, which ones are you aware of? And that list is going to be longer. And then top of mind, first mentioned, is similar to the first one, but it's the ones that they mention first. So it'll be the Kellogg's probably and the Weetabix versus the smaller niche brands that they might, come to maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th down in their list. And powerful brands are the ones that obviously are unaided brand awareness and that are first mentioned in the categories. So that's really the holy grail. But if they're not aware, if the first task of brand building is to make people aware that you exist, so that's a lot about communications. So that's the first task. And then a related but secondary task is around the brand image. So what associations are you trying to build? Are you an expert? Are you expensive? Are you friendly? And everything that you do needs to support what you've decided your brand is going to stand for in the market. This is another really important concept in branding, and it's about decision making, because brands are used as shortcuts for consumers to make the myriad of buying decisions that they make every day. We all have a favorite brand of ice cream or of milk, and they're just really shorthand ways that we don't have to, every time we go to the supermarket, it doesn't take us 10 hours to do our weekly shopping. So this is a little bit of theory. So from both psychology and now proven by neuroscience, is that humans are emotional in our decision making. We are not logical. And there was interesting experiments done by neuroscience in how we make decisions, and that they've looked at people who that part of the brain that is the emotional part of the brain. For people who have that a deteriorated state, they find it impossible to make decisions. So they're able to go through the logical arguments of, yes, this is better and that is better because, but they're unable to actually make a decision. So the emotion drives how consumers make decisions. So that really, really want to impress upon you that when you're brand building, really think about how a brand engages emotionally. That's why brand stories are so effective, because they really are a very human way to talk about a brand. If you're using lots of facts and figures, you're missing out on your emotional, on conveying the emotion, which is how people really make decisions. We retrospectively then go, oh yeah, the data says, but really consumers make judgments based on their emotions. So understanding that consumers and people make decisions based on these kind of heuristics and emotional drivers, your brand job is to create that emotional preference and brand loyalty to positively influence a decision to buy yours versus competitors because of the perceived higher value of yours. So there's a lot in there that I'm going to unpick, but it is about, creating a preference. So they have to understand that you're different. Brand loyalty, so you want them to come back and purchase with you again. And that you need to understand what people perceive of your brand versus what they perceive of your competitors, and that yours needs to be perceived as having somehow higher value. That doesn't mean higher price, but that means that your bundle of benefits and your bundle of perceptions resonates better and has higher value to your target consumer than your competitors. So brand equity. Around a third of the total of financial value of stock markets today can be accounted for by brands, making them a company's most important single asset. It makes logical sense that the brand should be the organizing principle by which competitive advantage is stitched into everything an organization does in products and services, in people and behavior, environments and channels, and of course, communications. So what this states is that this is the difference. The value being added by brands is the difference between the value of the assets that companies has and its valuation. And that they advocate, branding is really about building that added value. It's around organizing around one idea. Ogilvy, we called it the big idea. What's the one thing that you're going to organize everything that you do around? So that's at the end of the theory part of the presentation. But, how do you create a brand? What are the necessary steps that you need to take in order to start on this journey? So, brand mission. This is quite a good place to start. Why do you exist? So the purpose and organization serves its audience. So Patagonia has just updated its mission this year, actually, to say we're in business to save our home planet. It was previously this other longer statement. They've really honed in because they're being very proactive in their quest for sustainability and for shouting out, governments that aren't supporting the sustainability agenda. So this is really their mission, and everything that they do, really sticks to this one brand idea. It goes the entire way through their organization. It influences everything from the top down to all the details underneath. IKEA to create a better everyday life for the many people, Tesla to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, and TED to spread ideas. People consumers increasingly want to understand the company behind products that they buy, and they want to align with brands that share their value system. So I think missions are becoming increasingly important, but they need to stand for something, and this needs to be unique to you. If you're using, for example, plastics within your products, you should be having a view on, will you be replacing them, or are you using the ones that are going to be the least harmful? I think brands increasingly be called into account. And if you have a strong mission statement, I think that's, part one of really, starting on your brand building. Brand values. So much is written about brand values, and I've had a lot of experience developing these in organizations. The most important, there's lots of important watch outs for brand values. In a lot of companies, they're completely meaningless. They're just words on a page. They don't have too many. I've seen in companies where they have like 12 and, no one can remember them, which is really pointless if your staff are supposed to be guiding their decision making using them. So, a handful of brand values can be helpful. As a package, they need to be unique to you. And you need to interpret them for what they mean to staff in your business. And that can be done through workshops very effectively. Brand values, they should guide company decision making and employees at every level, and they should be understood and valued as such. And values, are really worth nothing until they cost you money. Values help you decide between, path A and path B. And, sometimes, you all path C, and often it could be the most expensive option, but that's the one that you feel is more aligned to your value system. And, that can be really powerful and as a guiding light to your staff. I mean, here is Google's values, and these are still in effect today. You can argue whether they stand by these, but I think most Google staff would be aware of this, and I know that they wrap this into their onboarding and their training and their reviews. So values aren't something that you come up in a statement once a year. You kind of stick them on the wall and then forget about them. If you're not living and breathing them, and if they're not used in decision making, they are just words. So I think when I've worked in organizations, there's some that values really drive the internal culture, and those make generally for very motivated workspaces. But staff can become very illusioned very quickly if you have these values, and management say that they believe in them, but actually they don't act on them, and there causes this dissonance or this disconnect between the values that are stated and the actual behaviors, and that can be incredibly damaging to a brand. Brand positioning statement. So this is probably the most important concept with regards to brand building. So a brand positioning statement is one statement, and it's important because it says what you do, who it's for, so for which target, how you do it better or different than your competitors, and then why your target audience should believe you. So it's made of those four pieces. So this is Amazon's positioning statement. So for consumers who want to purchase a wide range of products online with quick delivery, Amazon provides a one-stop online shopping site. Amazon sets itself apart from other online retailers, so that's versus the competitors, with its customer obsession, passion for innovation, and commitment to operational excellence. So I think we can probably agree that Amazon does do this, but it's one idea that this one statement, this one idea will drive everything operationally with Amazon. So here it is as one page. And when I'm working with brands, it takes probably a half-day workshop to work through doing this for a brand. So this is not airy-fairy. This needs to be based in data. So you need to understand your target audience and understand what their perceptions are about the other brands that are in your marketplace. You need to have an understanding, if you're an existing brand, of the brand associations that you already have with your customers. So you need to research them. Also, if you're a new brand coming to market, what associations you want to be associated with your brand. And then, this positioning statement needs to be agreed by, a lot of the company. I mean, I've done this and workshopped it through, organizations of a few hundred, where 20, 30, 40 people have been involved in coming up with the brand statement and then explaining their rationale to the other, 160. So it's really important that, you go through the exercise to put this together. It's super important to understand why you're different than your competitor, because the heart of brand building are really two big ideas. It's around uniqueness and creating it, and this is what the statement does, and then consistency in how you deliver it. So how to deliver on a brand. So really, after you've defined your brand positioning statement and you've got your brand mission, and you've got your brand values, the next thing is to come up with an implementation plan. And a good place to start is the marketing mix. So I think some of you will be aware of the 7 Ps. You can look it up online, what they are, but they're product, packaging, price, place, process, people, and physical evidence. And each one of these you need to look at through the lens of your brand positioning statement. And it really is as a way of aligning all the ducks in the row so they're all going in one direction, which is that one brand idea. And just to watch out for any dissonance that might be there. So, for example, if you're a brand that has fairness as a value, then you need to be looking at your HR recruitment policies. You need to be looking at your firing. How do you go about firing people or getting rid of people to make sure that's done in light of fairness? How do you remunerate people? How do you how do you set bonuses? How how do your returns policy or your complaints policy, is it deemed by your consumers to be fair? So this really runs through your entire organization. It's really not just about the communications. Yes, your communications are a big piece of this, and that they sit at the top of the iceberg, so they are the most visible. But however your consumers interact with your brand, be it online, through your customer service agents, through your social media sites, everything that you do, every little touch point, does it support that one brand that you're trying to build, or does it somehow detract? And that's where the brand dissonance comes in. If they're not quite aligned, or they're kind of, in some ways, so I've spotted places where I've been in brands where they're the complete opposite. You have a policy which is a complete odds of what your brand values stand for, and you're like, okay, we need to work on improving this. Building brand equity. So this is quite a useful reference, Keller's brand report card. This is used by big brands, but even for small brands, I think it is an interesting reference to how do we make sure that we are building strong brands. And these are kind of 10 things that is almost like a checklist. Does it deliver the benefits that customers desire? In that exercise of doing the brand positioning statement, you have to use real data about consumers' needs. There's absolutely no point in having your whole brand idea based on something that the consumer doesn't care less about in your category. I've seen that happen. So this is really based in customer insights and knowing what they want. You need to stay relevant. So big brands, they if they've been in market 50, 100 years, they need to make sure that, yes, they're consistent, but they also need to adapt to the modern consumer needs and tastes. Is it price based on consumers' perception? So your pricing, obviously you have the financial part of your pricing, but some of it is also perception. It's known that if you have a higher price point, consumers perceive your product to be better than something that is often than something that is cheaper. That's just how our brains work. Is it properly positioned? This consistency message. When you start having a hierarchy of brands or a suite of co-brands, how do they all fit together? Does it make sense? Looking at your marketing strategy, or all of it singing off the same hymn sheet, same messaging, and then the rest. So I think this is quite a useful reference that I've used with brands, even if you're a small brand. And let's not forget employer branding or your brand culture. So the benefits of having a strong brand culture are better people, lower acquisition costs, improve performance, longer retention, and potentially lower salaries. So I know that Google has 1 million applications per year for jobs. And then that's the power of the brand at play. And obviously you can, go through all of those applications and take the top, not whatever percent, to work on its products and services. But that doesn't come about just by wishing it. There's actually a lot of things that need to be, worked on within your organization to, create this strong brand, this strong internal brand. I worked as marketing director at Musto. And when I joined, Musto, which makes, sailing clothes, horse riding clothes, they've been going for 50 years, and they had a lot of brand associations, but they had none of these activities pinned down. And over a year, I put in place all of these. They didn't have, guidelines around the type of staff that they were hiring. They had no onboarding of staff. You didn't sit down and say, this is what the Musto brand stands for. That document didn't exist. Training, Musto sold online, and it also sold in retail outlets. We're selling high-end product, £800 jackets, and expecting people just to assume that they had some knowledge before they went and sold to the customers. Brand guidelines. I'll spend a little bit more time going on and showing you a few examples from brands a bit later. Reviews. When you're doing your review process, your values should be manifested in your review process. This is what people should be evaluated against. Internal communications. So Musto, there were none. There was staff, 170 staff were just expected to know what was going on, but actually what happened was there's lots of kind of whispers about and lots of misinformation about what the brand wanted to do, or the brand vision and mission was for the next 5 years. So we set up, monthly, newsletters from the CEOs saying, this is what we're really focusing on this month, and these are the successes that we've had. And surveys to check that, all of the things that you're putting into place, are they making an impact? Are people engaged? Do they understand, what the company is trying to achieve? So it's really important to, have that feedback loop in place and track it. And, we tracked it each quarter, and had town halls twice a year when everyone got together, and we set the corporate mission and went through the financials so that everybody understood. So all 170 staff knew where they stood and what they were expected to do in the next 3 months to 6 months. So the two real principles of uniqueness and consistency. So brand guidelines really speak to the consistency side. So when you're starting out as a brand, you're not going to think about all of these things. But as your brand grows, you'll start to add a lot of these. So, yes, of course, a brand guide would have your brand logo, your tagline, your colors. Now, tone of voice is a really interesting one. You need to have a consistent tone of voice. Are you using the first person? Are you using the third person? Are you using humor? Are you lighthearted? Are you a much more serious brand? And everybody who writes copy across your organization needs to understand that they have to write in one voice. So you have to give them guidance and examples of what that looks like. Yes, typography and design systems. If you're using agencies, you need to be able to brief them on what your brand should look like, because otherwise you'll start seeing variations coming back. Your photography style is actually quite important. So, are you shooting, are you a product that uses lots of people in your imagery? what are their ages, what are the sexes, what do those people look like, what are they doing, are they active, are they passive, are they smiling, are they not? All of this needs to be thought about, because the people who are putting out your social media or whatever, they need the guidance as to what images should be used by your brand. Your illustration style. So as brands grow, some of them start to use illustration. And it could be a key piece of visual that differentiates your brand. Iconography, how you use icons, in particular in mobile. Your animation style and data visualization. So, how do you portray tables, or how do your graphs look? They should be consistent across all of your communications. Your interactive elements. So as we now design more digital products, how those products are animated becomes really important. So 6 months ago, I was working on a new website, and for the first time, the brand was considering how their logo interacted. It wasn't just static and 2D on the site. It can move, it can swish. How do images come onto your web page? Do they come on, in a kind of a nice kind of relaxed way, or do they shoot on with high energy? Your video style. If you have different people shooting video in your social media team, or you've outsourced it, or you're doing some corporate videos, when you put all those together on your YouTube channel, does it look like a dog's dinner, or have they all been designed in the same kind of style that's portraying what you want your brand to say? Your jingle, if you're starting to work on radio or on television, you want to think about sound as well. Obviously, your web design and your email templates, what they look like. And when I've started working with brands, there comes a time when you want to invest probably in your own imagery and not rely on stock photography. So, making sure that your photographer understands what your brand stands for and is shooting the appropriate images that, all of your team can use across all of your channels. Your content strategy itself, it should be, and your brand stories, it should be telling the stories that support your values, that support your mission statement, pulling out the pieces that make you, that make you stand out from your competitors. There's no point just looking at competitors and like copying them. Really should be looking at, okay, I can use Instagram, but how do I bring to life what I'm about? How do you do it? And you have to really think and be creative, especially in, a channel like Instagram, where, you really can play and see what, you can put out there and people also engage in. So here are some examples of brand guides. So from the very simple, the American Red Cross, this is what a guide would look like. The top part is very much around logo design and usage, colorways and how to use them, and then typography, and then a little bit around the tone of voice. So that really is what I would call a minimum guide for a brand. The next one, Boy Scouts of America. You can if you're interested, you can just go search, brand guides of any of the brands that you admire. You can see if their guides are available online. Lots of them put their brand guides up because, what's the secret? But also they're working with lots of agencies that are working globally, and they want to make sure that, everybody who's working on the brand, has consistency, or anyone who's any staff member who joins understands the brand guidelines. Let's have a look. So it's quite a mammoth document. So they talk about this as the brand compass, which is quite a nice way of getting into this. But you can see the types of things that make up. Let's go down. They talk about the brand architecture, the mission. Anyway, And, here, look, so, they've consolidated all of the information about their brand into this one document. And first bit is all around, the mission and the values. There's a whole area on photography, signage, sub-brands, and then they go into all the digital guidelines, typography, color palettes, images, content, layout, website, mobile, email templates, online advertising, social video, and that's a pretty extensive list. And it's 100 pages long. I mean, my Musto guide was about 120 pages long. It also covered all of the retail experience, from coat hangers to signage, to description of the materials used in the garments and the technologies used. So this could be quite an extensive document. But I think, don't be fearful. At the beginning, you start with something simple, and then as you begin to develop your brand and you use more channels, you become more sophisticated. And when you start, say, getting into video, that's the time when you go, actually, this would be good to define a standard, to write it down so that future ones all kind of adhere to the same brand standard. And there's another one, Uber, which you can click on to, which tells a lot about the story and gives lots and lots of examples of how their brand is used in their marketing communications. So you've created your brand, you've put your brand out there, you've got a brand implementation plan, you've spent your money, you've doing all the activities, you've aligned your internal brand culture. That's fantastic, but you need to measure it. So you need to understand, is it on track? So as I went into detail about the internal understanding of the brand through surveys, then I do advocate for tracking brand awareness and your brand image perceptions. And in a small brand, I would say that it's probably sufficient to do that once a year. At British Airways, we did it once every 6 months, but we did ongoing customer surveys on the plane just to make sure that a few of those things, that through a few of the KPIs were being adhered to. And how do you do that? So yes, there are very expensive brand trackers that the big global brands use, but you can start simply. If you're a small brand starting out, you can look at your website user trends. Are you getting more traffic? One very good area to look is at your brand search terms and volumes. Are they increasing as a percentage and going up as more people are hearing about your brand due to your activity that you're doing to promote awareness? You should be doing a little bit of qualitative research, a little bit of quantitative research. So there are some pretty low value tools to do the quant, and it's pretty easy to pick up the phone to consumers in most industries. Social analysis is again, an excellent, really easy and inexpensive way. So you're looking at sentiments, the positive and the negatives. You're looking at engagement, and you're looking at the volume of mentions and who's mentioning your brand. And as I said, there are more expensive gold-plated brand trackers in the market, but I'd assume that most of those are out of the budget of you guys. So what you're doing here is all of that activity that you've put into the market, you're then tracking, what is the perception in your consumers' minds of all of that activity that you've been doing. And a year is a good length of time to make those amends. Here's an example that I've worked on. So I worked on a brand called Chic Retreats. It's an online booking platform, a bit like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So when I joined, the brand and the website experience looked like this, very 1990s, although I joined in 2015. So, it had no real understanding of branding visually, or, we were selling, 4-star and 5-star, bedrooms and hotels, and the experience looked like a 2 or 3-star. So there was a disconnect between how the brand was portraying itself and that was stifling growth. So on the right is the redesign of the brand, but it also, not just the look and feel, but the whole experience and the whole insights of like what consumers are looking for in this category. And that was done because of that tracking, which was, we went back to our consumers who've been buying the product, and said, would you advise your mates to book with this brand? And like, I've had a good experience, but it doesn't look great. And would you, mention this in social? And, it doesn't really portray what I'm trying to do as an influencer. So this is the move, and it did support significant growth in doing this repositioning work. There are a few watch outs in regards to branding. So branding, like most of marketing, you have a brand that has to appeal to a market segment, your target audience. You're not trying to appeal to everybody. So I think most of the brands that you represent will have a particular target audience, and it's really about what brand perceptions that you are delivering, or that they perceive of your brand. It doesn't really matter about everybody else. It's really about who you want to buy your product and who is buying your product. If you have a brand consultant come to you and just give an opinion on your brand without any data, without asking your consumers, without looking at competitors, kind of show them the door. No one's really interested in, I like the color pink, or I don't like the color pink. This is, when I've been working with a leadership team, people don't really understand branding. They think it's the coloring in department. This is a struggle, but, we need to educate, that, branding is a whole company philosophy, and everybody impacts on the brand. Another watch out is, when I see, brands with lots of features and they haven't translated that into benefits, then there's a real missed opportunity, because consumers buy, benefits, and as we've said, they buy emotionally. If you're having someone come to you and go, there's 3 great things that your brand should stand for, you need to consolidate it into one thing. People, like consumers, that they have space in their minds, kind of a couple of things or one thing about you. They 2 things would be competing for their attention, and they will just pick one that stands out the most. Keep to one. There might be 5, 20, 25 things that you really want to talk about in your communications, that you really want to put, and that when you're going out, particularly in advertising, you need to have one thing that you're really going to stand for. And on your website you can say, these are the features that support that one brand idea. And don't go, here's a real watch out, brand bingo. Don't come up with a brand that's supposed to be unique, with all these kind of words that in my mind are overused. If you can have your brand, your positioning statement, or your brand values or your brand mission, and stick your competitor's logo on them, then you failed in terms of creating a unique brand that only you can own. Because really you're talking about a unique brand that only you can own, and that's how you've created your unique brand equity. And lastly, even the big boys get branding wrong. So here are a few fun examples. So could you believe it? Colgate entered the frozen food market, and understandably no one bought their products. Disney, Disney, a branding king, even they got it wrong. They partnered with a cherry producer and started putting their logo across cherries. They were talking about putting on a mutual fund, and then they discovered that that's a stretch too far from their consumers. That's not the perception that their brands. It's too much of a brand stretch. This great example from Pepsi, when its slogan was "Come Alive with the Pepsi Generation." They did a direct translation of that, and it meant Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. And more modern examples, on this little boy's t-shirt, it says "the coolest monkey in the jungle," and this ran on H&M's website in 2018. Can you believe it? And you can see the amount of people who have talked about this, and I can guarantee you it's not positive. This example from Heineken showed a bartender slide a beer past 3 people, all black, to a lighter skinned woman with the tagline, "Sometimes lighter is better." And again, they got chastised for that. Social media, mistakes can happen here very, very easily. Be very careful of, pushing the responsibility for, all of your social media to an intern or to a junior who doesn't understand your brand, or there aren't proper controls around the content that goes out. So, Warburton's ran a competition with the hashtag Crumpet Creations. However, they didn't realize that, that hashtag was associated with the furry community, slightly sexual in nature. So that came as a big surprise, and they obviously had a backlash against that. So it's very easy to do in social media, because you've got a high turnover of content, you don't have a lot of time to plan, but there need to be some guidelines and some controls around this. I've seen this go wrong quite quickly, quite easily. And that's it on branding. So over to questions.
So if anyone's got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. Apologies, just get the right presentation up as well. So I've got one for you, Amanda, saying, "Thank you for this. For a very young SME, when is the right time to start thinking about branding?"
Now. Because you either do this with intention, or you're creating your brand unintentionally. So everything that you're doing is, if you haven't defined your, what your brand mission is and your values, I would suggest that you spend, half a day and, try and do this, because it's harder to do it later. I think doing it later, you'll have made some missteps, and you'll probably invest in some things that really might detract from my current brand. So, and things live on in the digital hemisphere. So I would do it sooner rather than later, because everything that you're putting out is creating that perception anyway. And if you haven't managed it, you're just putting an unmanaged brand into the marketplace.
So I've got a question from Emma. She says, "Have you worked with any education or education technology companies and have insights from that sector?" She is very early stage and one-man band in education technology startup.
So I've worked at BPP for professional education. So they provide online and face-to-face education for undergraduates going all the way to professional development. Branding in that sector. So trust is a really important part when people are buying education. I'm not so sure as much in tech, but for any new brand, your brand and a strong brand can help you overcome your newness. Because why would people want to buy from a new brand? It's much easier to go to an existing provider who has reviews, who has experience, who has customer case studies, right? So there's ways to reduce that. And if you have all your brand ducks aligned, you'll have understood what your target needs are. You'll have one clear message going into the marketplace that should resonate clearly through, because they'll be assessing competitors. So that's about building your uniqueness. And then there's tactics that you can use in your comms to help reduce the perceived risk of buying a new supplier.
And Debbie's asked, what size team do you need to sustain proper branding? Do you need dedicated in-house resource to do it properly?
It's a really good question. So when you start out, you're not putting out the same volume as when you get to a much bigger sized organization. But I think it's more important that everybody who is creating any content that's going out there understands some basic brand guidelines. So that you've had like, even if they're written and they're stuck on a wall, in edit form, that, if there's 3 people working and putting out social or email, newsletters, that you all have a common understanding of, like, this is the key message we're trying to put out, so that you're coming across it as one brand. I think the consistency becomes a lot more important, and the need for guidelines as the organization grows and more people are putting out content and being involved with the brand. But when you really start, I think you just can't let it, kind of not manage it. It needs to, I think it does really need to be managed, and it needs to be thoughtful and put together. And that's how you build a strong brand. It's planned. You build a strong brand through planning, not by, just making things up as you go along. That's not to say that you can't be, innovative and try new things and new tactics and, try things that your competitors haven't, as long as they're true to your brand. And I think that is always a really useful frame of reference. What I found is that, when, an early stage brand has a really clear identity, and a really clear, strong target audience, it helps focus. And it helps grow a business really fast, because they don't get sidetracked by, it makes decisions really fast. So there's not a lot of debate, because there's like 3 options on the table. Like, no, this is the obvious one, because, that's our brand. So it shortcuts decision making, and it keeps a focus that is really helpful to a young brand.
Jolanta,
especially when, go on.
Sorry, Amanda, carry on.
So, sitting, with, when I had, a marketing title in my, as part of my job description, I get a lot of inbound people trying to sell me things. And, most of them you can easily say quickly no to, because you're like, is this part of my, brand plan? Is this what I want to put into the market? Is this add-on EasyJet going to help me? And it's really easy to go, no, it's not supporting my brand strategy. It's not supporting what I've already set out to do. And some things might come on your desk, like, oh my God, this completely fits with what I'm trying to achieve, and it's really cheap. I'll definitely get involved in this initiative. As a young brand, you can't do everything, and you've really got to pick and choose, who your partners are, for example. And those that align with your brand are the ones that you should, double down on, and just, say no to everything else that doesn't, neatly fit with, your brand.
So Jolanta has asked, does a B2B service need branding, and does it differ in any way?
Absolutely. So, so even in the B2B space, decision making is by people, and they are still not logical. They will use a lot of facts and figures to back up their decision making, and organizations go through ticking off the boxes, and that's great. It has to have certain features, but ultimately the decision will probably be made on soft things like are you easy to get along with? What are you responsive? And some of these softer features, and how part of your brand experience than pure numbers. And what are the differences? So a lot is the same. You'll still go through, defining the brand positioning statement, the mission. I've worked in both. Really what I find is different is that you have a target audience which is generally smaller in number, and it's more one-to-one selling. So the actual marketing mix, the actual promotions that you do, the channels tend to be different. But the brand building elements can be very much the same. And if you have, I've worked in with brands that have a B2B and a B2C, and it's important that it's one brand facing off to both sides. So that the level of detail might be different in your marketing communications and the channels that you use, but the brand building elements that I've talked to are really the same principles.
Right, okay, so we're running out of time. I'm just going to go through maybe 2 or 3 more questions really quickly. So when do you have to start thinking about branding if you're planning a startup?
As early as possible. I mean, when you're, if you look at the marketing mix, product is one of those things. And I'm also an angel investor, so I see a lot of pitches, and the ones who have thought about their brand, especially in the consumer space, it's absolutely vital to have established your brand, and to you should be going to pitches where this is what my ads are going to look like. Make it real if you're looking for investors. It's really powerful if you've gone to that level of detail. And if you're if you're entering a competitive space, your brand might be the only thing that differentiates you. There might be really super subtle things that make consumers pick you versus pick someone else. Think about how competitive the beauty, the makeup space is. And yet, we have brand perceptions of, Decay versus, MAC versus, all of those other brands. A lot of them are producing very similar product. Part of what you're offering, if you're people are going to invest in a brand. It's that brand equity piece that I spoke about. That's what, and if you can talk eloquently about that, you understand the added value that you're offering, because the references are generic of your product and they're not going to invest in a generic of your product. So what is it that you're offering? What are those things that you're going to do to build that up? And the more that you can bring to touch and feel and look at and to make it real for an investor, the better. If it's something that you're selling, you need to bring is the olives. If you're you need to bring the ad, the website, the mock-up, whatever it looks like, to get other people to invest, but also consumers, to buy. As I said, there is a trend towards, consumers, wanting to understand the brand behind it. So put your mission statement, on your website.
So last 2 questions. I have a third one, but I will explain why I'm not going to ask that during the webinar. So is it okay to be inspired by branding styles in different marketing genres? So for example, we're in DIY market, target 25 to 45-year-olds, but love the branding styles of Innocent.
Absolutely. You can look for ideas and inspiration. And actually, when I'm doing, branding workshops, one of the exercises to look at brands from different sectors, and to ask, the participants to say, if you were this brand, what would you do differently? Just to have ideas. So absolutely, you can apply what you think is a great brand to what they're doing to your sector. It's not going to look the same in DIY, but absolutely you can look at ideas, because brands have they come up with new ways of expressing themselves, and they come up with a new way of doing things. You might go, that's really neat. I look at some Instagram accounts and go, actually that's really neat technique of how they've managed to convey that. That's really interesting. I can apply that. It's not my sector, but that's really it's really interesting. But always it looks like your brand when you put it out there. Absolutely.
And then last question. So is it a mistake to retweet material from personal social media accounts when you're early stages? They're struggling to manage their own media accounts, doing networking and keeping the business accounts active.
Oh, that's a good question. When you're early stage, who you are is really important, and becomes less so as the brand kind of becomes the dominant feature of your comms. So that'll be a trade-off. I wouldn't, if you don't already have a strong personal brand, and you're growing a business, I would say, okay, I would invest the time in building the brand. But if you have a strong personal brand already, if you're known for being an expert in something, then definitely continue to do that. And because that has a halo effect on your brand as the founder.
Okay, and the question that I'm not going to ask online is about further resources, so I'll follow up with Amanda on that separately, and if there's any further resources, we will email them out to you with webinar materials as well. So thank you very much for all your insights, Amanda, and for the whole presentation. It was fantastic. Just a couple of quick things from me. So we've got a further webinar being held on the 6th of November, which is an introduction to innovation funding and finance. You can go onto KTN's website and register for that now. If you want to keep up to date with things within the Women in Innovation community, we have a newsletter which you can sign up to via KTN's website. There's an online community on the World Labs platform, or you can email me directly if you've got any questions. And I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today. And Amanda for the brilliant presentation. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you again on the 6th of November.
Good luck with it.